Welcome to session 4 of the PayPal story. So we'll start with a brief recap of the session 3. So in session 3, we covered how it's very important to figure out a way to cope with rapid growth if your startup or disruptive innovation actually ends up with this nice problem to have of rapid growth, and how you can execute innovation very rapidly if you get a very good idea, if your team is supportive, and you also think through all the details related to the innovation. So if you want to learn more about that, see session 3. Now, in this session, I want to take a little time out and talk about how settling down is very important. Because unless you have a settled mind, it's very hard to work 100 hours a week and be creative and so on and so forth. So one of the things which was causing us a little bit of concern and continued to cause us concern for some time was that all our eggs were in the X.com basket. But we, as it turned out, it was a good basket and it made sense to have all our eggs in there. Then we had moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. We had sold a house there. So now we needed to buy a house on the West Coast. But we took a very good decision to actually rent a house for a little while we figured out what kind of house we were going to buy. Now, you may remember, if you've been looking at the earlier sessions, that one of the reasons why I felt I could leave Citibank was that I had shares with a company called Webvan, where my brother was associated, and I had some friends and family's shares, where I had invested around $50,000, but they had gone up to as much as $1.5 million. So when we were looking for a home, we felt, we can buy a very expensive home, and maybe we felt we should, because we are on this nice wicket. X.com is trying to change the world. We had faith that it would, and we felt that we might do quite well. So there was this temptation to buy a fairly expensive home. But then we remembered about optionality and all those kind of things. And then we said, let's not be in a rush to, and fortunately we did that, because this company Webvan cratered. It fell from a huge stock price to almost a stock price of zero. And by the time that I managed to get out, I managed to make $250,000 on that 50,000. But that 1.5 million came down to $250,000. So had we bought a very expensive house and had an expensive mortgage, and if that, given that the Webvan collapsed, it would have caused a fair amount of stress. So fortunately, we didn't do that. And then we ended up buying a home because my brother was moving, so we bought his home, and it turned out to be a reasonable deal and quite a nice home, which we really loved for the years that we spent in the Bay Area till we moved to India. So this whole idea of renting rather than buying turned out to be a very good one. And we also, Sandeep Lal, who had also joined PayPal moving from Singapore, he stayed with us in this rental. So it was almost like a chummery. And we had some friends. There was another person who was a relative who moved. And we still look back on those days with great fondness. So renting was a lot of fun. Then we had to fit in back into Silicon Valley. We had a few friends, so it wasn't as if that we could neglect our social life totally. So we remember things like, driving, say 60 miles to just show our face at a party and spend maybe half an hour and then drive back, so that we sort of started growing our social circle. And because we knew that this 100-hour work week period would end at some point, and we had to have some sort of a work-life balance, even if you were working 100-hour work weeks. Now, some of the things that I think some of the people who are very good at disruptive innovation share is a somewhat manic disruptive innovation personality. Because, you know, most people would say, how can you do this? Like, you work 100-hour work weeks, you settle down, relocate, and do all these kind of things, you know. But somehow or the other, for a person who's very good at disruptive innovation and in a somewhat manic state, all this happens and it doesn't create a huge amount of stress. In fact, at least for me, the spaces where I've been really busy doing 100-hour work weeks and all have been much easier to deal with than in states where I've been frustrated. So now also Elon was quite clear that, you know, he had the skill to think big, to get a company started, but he didn't necessarily see himself as a big company CEO at that point in time. So he was always on the lookout for trying to attract a big company CEO to join. And Bill Harris, who was earlier the CEO of Intuit, decided to join X.com because, you know, at that point in time, a lot of CEOs were thinking that, you know, these .com companies were going to be the future, and they wanted to kind of join. Now, one of the things that big company CEOs, they have a brand, their own brand to protect. They kind of look at things with a little bit of a different lens. They're not that keen to move very fast, especially on regulatory issues. So they often want to try and get permission. While Elon was more of the view that, you know, you execute first, and if, you know, later on there's a problem, then you ask for forgiveness. So you don't wait to get permission. So it seems as a Chinese proverb that it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Well, whatever that is. But this created a fair amount of stress for Bill. But otherwise, he was a great CEO. We loved interacting with him. Manita also said that, you know, she was really amazed as to how quickly he grasped things and how well he made decisions. And it was during Bill's time that X.com and Confinity decided to merge, or rather X.com bought Confinity. Now, Confinity was the company that owned the brand name PayPal, and they started off as a Palm Pilot company. And they had a great technology team, very good people. They had a much lighter model than X.com, which didn't involve a bank. And later on in X.com, we realized that we didn't need a bank to do what we wanted to do in payments. And X.com actually got rid of the bank and made its model very light after the merger with PayPal. So the merger made a lot of sense, but Confinity as a company was running out of money, and they had to either get acquired by Yahoo or by another company. I think it was called .x at that time, or X.com. And they rightly also chose X.com as the company that would acquire them. This merger happened. But soon after the merger, then in I think a couple of board meetings, the board, and also at that time, post the merger, PayPal, though it was basically the .com bust, which had happened, and it was very difficult to raise money, but PayPal was on a very strong wicket, and it had a good story. And though it was all free and into just creating accounts, you know, it managed to raise $500 million, and that round was led by Madison Dearborn Venture Capital Fund. And so in the board meetings, it transpired that the board decided that Bill was too not the right fit for a very aggressive startup. and Bill decided to leave, and Elon Musk came back as CEO. Now, in the meanwhile, after the merger, there were now two management teams, and it was clear that the person who headed product in Confinity was a person called David Sachs. And when we looked at, say, me and David, there was clearly David Sachs understood the internet better, and he was much better at the front end. And it was decided that he would lead the product, and I would play more a role on doing various things on the back end, looking at international and working with Reed. Now, this is something that I could have resisted, but fortunately, I kind of understood that that was the best thing for the combined company, and I didn't resist. And I got along quite well with the Confinity team, and I liked Reed as my boss. And so though there was now a layer between me and Elon, I welcome that and move forward. And this again is, I think, a key learning, because if you are in a startup, it's not about your position, it's not about politics. Sometimes you've got to realize that if you have a stake in the company and someone else can make it big, then it's really wise for you to let that happen so that your stake becomes very valuable. So that's all for this session. The story will continue in the next section. Thank you very much for listening.